Hi, friends. Well, I think last you heard from us, we were talking about horses arriving. A horse is here. And it's a pretty magical story. We're going to introduce you to him quite soon. But I think this is going to take us to some fun and interesting videos. Because again, if you remember last time, I was talking with Mirabelle was here, and she was talking about featherlight, this way of communicating with a horse. And I say a horse, but this works in many different contexts. It's quite unique and quite different than we usually think of when we think of training, where we might think of operant conditioning or other methods that are more conventional. In fact, the whole idea of training maybe is called into question here. Now, you might wonder what this has to do with ReWild U type stuff. And I was going to share something today, a story. Maybe you've heard it before. It's about a horse named Clever Hans. And this story, interesting in itself, it points to a, a shift, I'm going to say, in human consciousness. And a shift that I think put a block between us and nature. You know, when we think about bushcraft, we think, okay, we're going to go out into the woods, maybe we're going to learn some skills. But I would wager that any of us that go out to practice bushcraft, any of us who go out camping, backpacking, on wilderness excursions, we're not just out there to practice skills. Maybe there's a few people, but most of us are out there because we recognize that there's something deeper to life. We humans have created all these drama games that we wrap our lives around. And collectively, we could call this civilization. These drama games can become our reality. And we can get so tied into those that we forget that there's anything else until we get out in nature. And when we get out in nature, we start to feel something. Any of us that have any level of sensitivity, when we're out in the woods, out by the ocean side, in a prairie, we start to recognize something that's missing. Sometimes we get out there, we don't even want to come back, right? We feel like there's something calling us. And I'd say that there is. You know, there's a world from whence we came long ago, and to which we very well as a species may return at some point sooner or later. And that is a world that is apart from our civilization, that we have, through our civilization, often learned to fear. But those of us who have been out, maybe doing some minimalist camping, we know it, we feel it. That connection to the world that is difficult, if not almost impossible to get when we're wrapped up in the human drama, in the modern mindset. So this story of Clever Hans is going to show us some of what happened and give us a clue as to what is waiting for us as we connect more deeply with nature. We have to harken back to 1904. And worldwide, a scientific phenomena was sweeping over the globe. It was news about a horse named Hans. He was an 8-year-old stallion, and this is in Germany. And his owner, gentleman von Osten, he would do these little shows. And Hans would be standing there rather, and there'd be an audience. And Hans would do mathematics. What is 14 minus 8? No horse, of course, can do arithmetic, but yes, he could. He would give the numbers by tapping his foot, his hoof. And in this case, he would give 6 taps, and everybody would be amazed. Furthermore, he could, even by tapping out the number of a letter, so 1 for A, 2 for B, he could answer questions about almost anything. Who was the third king of England? And he could spell it out. Now, of course, when something is that incredible, we get incredulous. And people thought there must be some trickery involved. So a panel of 13 experts was put together. These included a psychologist, very importantly, and a zookeeper, and I think a college professor, people from a wide range of different disciplines. And these people were charged with seeing if there was any, hanky-panky going on here. And remarkably, their conclusion was no, there's not. There was no covert signaling going on. The horse was standing there, a question was asked, and to make sure that it wasn't the horse's owner performing some kind of trickery with his horse, other people would go up and question Hans. And Hans, being as clever as he was, performed just as well with other people as he did with his owner, von Osten. As you can imagine, this created a worldwide stir, as I said in the beginning. People were utterly amazed. And it changed the ideas for a moment of what animal intelligence might be like. Most people had thought of animals as maybe not the smartest things in the world, but here was irrefutable evidence that this horse could do things that we thought only humans could do. Then, the psychologist, remember I hearkened to? Well, it was actually his psychologist's assistant who noticed this, but started to observe that if von Osten did not know the answer to a question, Hans, the horse, would not know the answer either. Likewise, if whoever the questioner was did not know the answer, Hans often would not know the answer. And this led him to some very, very careful observation, and finally coming to the conclusion that there was signaling going on. But this signaling was so subtle and so unconscious. This was not trickery on von Osten's part. He, other questioners, the audience, were all making tiny little cues when we would get to the right number. And, for instance, in a math equation. And the horse was picking up on those things that the humans, even that panel of experts, were unaware of. Then something very negative happened. Clever Hans was considered defrauded and went not only back to being a stupid animal, but it was seen as doubling the proof that animals just were dumb. You see, we humans are not so smart ourselves. When we have a belief and then we gain a bunch of evidence showing that belief is not right, but then we're shown that all that evidence was false, we tend to go back and entrench ourselves deeper in that original belief. Instead of looking and saying, wait, is there something in that mixture of evidence that is giving a different story? That's the opportunity we had right there. We had the opportunity to see, no, animals are not dumb machines. In fact, Hans was doing something that humans are basically incapable of. It's a different kind of intelligence, a different kind of awareness than humans have. But that doesn't mean we have to say it's less. It's just different, and it's capable of different things than our intelligence or awareness is capable of. Now we come full circle to this featherlight, this way of communicating with a horse. Because what you're going to be seeing from Mirabelle, and she's teaching me, so I'll be exploring it as well, is a way to bridge the gap between horse intelligence and human intelligence, and to find ways to communicate between species. The beautiful thing is that this is not just about horses. So when we go out into nature, there are innumerable species, and we might even say nature itself has a method of communication that most of us are unaware of. There's languages in the forest. There's languages, for instance, of tracks. And it takes us quite a while to learn that language. But as we do, what formerly looked like bare ground becomes a canvas, a storybook, telling all kinds of tales. When we start to listen to bird song, or the sounds of squirrels, the body language of a deer in the field, the more we pay attention, the more we expand, the more we see beyond just our human tendency to just use words and recognize that there are so many different kinds of languages, from the dolphin's clicks to body language, which dogs and horses and deer, all kinds of animals use, to sounds that are beyond our range of hearing, to touch, the touch of the wind, most of us unaware of, but as we start to feel it, that speaks its own language and tells us things that we're not aware of. If we're not open to that, aware of that, you see what this is pointing to is that this world that we live in is this giant, rich cauldron of amazing experiences that are just waiting for us. But in our civilized world, we can start to think that the coolest stuff is just on Instagram. We get locked into our devices, locked into our ways of thinking, our habitual ways of thinking, locked into thinking that language is the primary and most important method of communication. And then somehow, being sometimes the not so intelligent creatures we are, we don't notice that, wow, language hasn't worked so well in my marriage. We keep coming back to the same problems and using the same words and hashing over the same issues without getting anywhere. Maybe this has something to do with the type of language we're using and the limitations of it. So as we adventure forth on some of these new videos that are going to feature Mirabelle, my family, this wonderful horse that has come into our lives, our neighbor's horse, who they're just in the process of getting a horse companion as well, who's going to stay on our land. We're all going to be learning together some new ways to communicate. And those ways are applicable to communicating with the animals in your lives, with the humans in your lives, and with nature in general, deepening our connection in all of these arenas so that we can rediscover how rich life is. So we will be getting one of these videos ready, hopefully in the next week or so, bring to you, and you can see the beginning of this method of communication with our horse friend, and we'll introduce him. I think you're going to love him. And from there, we'll take it deeper into exploring new ways to communicate with self, with nature, with those around us. Share your thoughts, my friends, and can't wait to talk with you in the comments. Love to you all.